special welcome to another Code Johannesburg. I am excited to be joined by Sampa. Sampa is joining me all the way from Lusaka, Zambia. For those of you who've been following me on social media, you know that I did spend quite some time in the past few weeks in Zambia, just promoting our global summit that is coming up. I was in Lusaka, so I'm very excited that Sampa is joining me from Lusaka, Zambia. Sampa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
It's an
Really glad to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. So I was very intrigued by your sharing around the Data Protection Act that you did on LinkedIn. And I just thought that is actually a very good way to just break down information, especially for people who don't have understanding of the technological landscape. And this podcast really is about that. It's about breaking down technological concepts for everyday people to understand and embrace technology. So I am very, very excited to dive into the Data Protection Act that you analyzed and spoke about on LinkedIn. But before we do that, let's get our listeners to get to know a little bit about you. Who is Sampa, and what journey have you walked to get to where you are?
Okay, thank you for that. Let me give you the condensed version, for the sake of I because it's 38 years of history that I need to condense in a couple of minutes. So, number one, Sampa Sampa, a Zambian citizen, born in 1985 to two parents, Davis and Sampa, husband of one wife. Uh, my journey, of course, started in 85. That's when I was born. I've lived both here in Zambia and Germany, in mostly Germany in my early formative years. I finished off my primary school, high school within here, Zambia, at Lakewood Primary School. From there, I started my tertiary education at ZICAS, which is Zambia Center for Accountancy Studies, where I pursued a Bachelor of Science degree in Computing and Information Systems. It was a 3.5 year program. From there, I joined the workforce with Ernst& Young Zambia, or EY Zambia as it's known now, in 2007. So from 2007 up to, I'd say 2008, I was working here in the local practice in Osaka. In 2008, I got a secondment to the Zimbabwe practice of EY to actually pursue or build my skills in IT auditing. Because at that time, there was a skill, you could say within that unit here in Zambia, there was a skills shortage of IT related assurance professionals. So I did my secondment there. I was there for about 6 months. After that 6 month secondment, I was based in the Harare practice. After the 6 month secondment, I came back here to Zambia and continued my work with EY from that was from 2007 up to 2011. So I was basically doing what they call IT assurance work, where we assess the impact or the effectiveness of IT systems. We try to highlight what issues they have and the like. And then from there, in 2011, I was fortunate enough to get an appointment in government. I was appointed to work as an technology officer at the office of the Auditor General. So you see, it's funny how my journey has always been at some point under some audit function. I don't know whether it's willingly or unwillingly, but I guess that's how the Lord directs me. So yeah, so from 2011 up to 2018, that's a 7 year period, I was working at the office of the Auditor General in the IT department. So at that time, we were looking at applications development, the building applications, support, technical everyday support for people, as well as administration of the systems that they did have at that time. So, following 2018, I was again fortunate enough to get a new job that was with where I currently am now with World Vision International in the Global Internal Audit Department. Then my role now involves me doing IT, managing the IT audit function in in the Southern Africa region. But I do my work is not just limited to this region, but I also work with people beyond. So it's as you know, we're all in a global village. So I guess now I can say I've officially joined that village.
Indeed, you have. What a colorful career you've had, Sampa. And so you told me you are a husband as well. I always love to elevate the family conversation because we need to be really pushing the agenda of work-life balance, and really family is a bigger part of who people are, even though they're workers or employees, but they're also family people. Do you just want to tell us a little bit about your work-life balance there, and just your family aspect?
Okay. Well, initially, especially post the early years of marriage, my work-life balance was your traditional 9 to 5. You wake up in the morning, you're at the office by 8, you leave at 17, you come back home, you have dinner, and then you sleep. But over time, that has kind of changed. And I think one of the biggest factors was COVID coming in because we were forced now to continue to operate, but from home. And now it was one of those things. How do I strike a balance? Because it's easy when you're not at home, you're in the
Mm,
office. So it's like
mm,
you're in a different world. But now you have brought that world from the outside and its pressures into the home setup, which
mm,
now kind of complicates things because now how do you it was now how do I manage the stress from work at home? It's easy to manage stress sometimes in that environment. You can
yeah,
keep it there and compartmentalize it there because when you leave, work is one place, home is one place. Now, what
yeah.
happens? They become one. What do you do? So, for me, I made a deliberate effort to divide my time accordingly every day,
Mm,
so that I have specific times for whatever I'm seeking to do, whether it's personal stuff and work stuff, but in a way that it doesn't affect the output of the work that I do. Because for me, in the job that I'm in, we are assessed on the reports that we give. As much as work you can do and report to the office every day, what matters is the reports that you give. What
mm,
insight are you providing? What's the product, the actual product that your work delivers? That's what the assessment is. So like, okay, I know what the product is. Let me align my activities towards that so that even when I still have time for personal things, but my product is not affected by that, or the quality of the product is not affected by that. And of course, home is very important because it also keeps you grounded and
mm,
sort of your mind. Because if you're stressed at home, you're fighting battles in the house. Then you go and fight battles out there. Hey, it's problems. It's problems. I'm not saying that I'm unique, that I don't have stresses like that. No, no, no. We all do. But it's just trying to genuinely find a balance and one that
mm,
works for you. Because remember, all of us are different. Huh?
mm,
Very what
mm.
works for me may not work for someone else. So for me, I'm
Absolutely.
an early person. I know I have programmed myself in such a way that if I can do things as early as possible and try to run with the sun, that's what we call it, meaning that I'm active. Most of my activities follow the sun. Once the sun goes, I also shut down. That kind of thing. But of course, there are instances where I have to extend. But for me, that's what works.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So then let's get into the technical conversation. I love the fact that you've got exposure to a lot of markets because you work with regional offices, and so that actually gives you almost the authority to talk about the Data Protection Act as it relates to other countries as well that you're involved with.
Mhm.
Um, so then let's start by defining. I'm a teacher by profession, and so definitions are big as part of disseminating information for people to learn. So
Mhm.
Zambia has recently enacted the Data Protection Act. It's been put into law. Uh, and somebody might not know what this is. What is a Data Protection Act?
Okay, so thank you for mentioning that you're a teacher. My mother's also a retired teacher by profession, so she's always instilled that need for me to explain things to people as clearly as possible, so that they
Nice.
understand. So the Data Protection Act, this is essentially what they call legislation or a law that has been created in order to provide one guidance and enhance the protection of people's personal information. So when I say personal information, I'm talking like things like for a Zambian, that's your NRC, your names, your IDs, anything that is relatable to you that identifies who you are, and information beyond that that is personal to that you as an individual has value. So just as an additional background to this, so just understanding this, I can comment that Zambia has taken a step into enacting it, because it's something it's a conversation that has been going on worldwide. And I thought, based on how, like you said, my exposure with elsewhere and conversations I've had in other spheres with people based in other regions, this is something that encroaches and affects everybody, whether we like it or not. It's not an IT thing, it's not a technical thing, it's a people thing. So it's something that's very, very important to our heart.
Beautiful, beautiful, and well explained. And I love the fact that you are saying this is, this is an act that affects everybody. It's not necessarily for people in tech. Everybody needs to understand, what this is. So then, in a nutshell, how would you summarize the key objectives and principles of the Zambia Data Protection Act? And how does it compare to similar legislation in other countries?
Okay, so let me take it from the top. At its very core, the Data Protection Act is a law that focuses on safeguarding people's privacy and rights. And this is connected to one of the articles that I have to be, it could be Article 17, I stand to be corrected, in the Constitution, which requires people's information to be guarded. So in terms of objectives, it applies to every single bit of processing of data, whether it's done automatically or manually. So when I say processing of data, this I can, for example, give with a telecom company. When you are signing up for a service, say you want to get a SIM card, they get all your information, your ID, and then process that in your system, and they give you a SIM card with a number and register you accordingly. So that is just an example of something that's done manually and automatically. So the law ensures that you as an individual have control over this personal information, and it gives you various protections to uphold your right of that information that you're giving. Another important principle in that act, I would say, is freedom. It promotes freedom of expression. So specifically, I'll be quoting a lot of sections. So if the number is off, please forgive me. It's a very long document. I may transpose maybe some numbers here, but I'll try to work just to cover the general ideas that are being covered by that. So Section 43, it exempts things like journalistic work. So that's stuff that your media houses are producing, and even like this, technically you're a media house producing works. It prevents, or should I say, it exempts you from certain restrictions that are relevant to the accuracy, purpose, and security. So it's compared to other laws in African countries, um, where there's a lot of restriction on people's rights. These laws actually give us that leeway that we have ownership of the data we have, and it doesn't limit our freedom of expression and as well access to that information. And
Beautiful.
Ernest, do you want to jump in before I continue? Because I don't want to blabber
No, no, no,
on.
no. No, carry on. Carry on.
Yeah, since I know it's a very technical area, so I don't want to bore people too much. So continuing on that, the Act also has detailed regulations which concern transfer of information, personal data, outside Zambia. So, in general, according to the Act, personal data has to be stored within Zambia. That's, I think, in part section 70 and 71. But it also allows for data to be stored outside, or outside if authorized by a particular minister. Of course, there's discussions around the practicality of this, and I think I'll cover this in terms of the weakness that the act has. Um, so generally, this just ensures that the act is in line with other other legislations in other countries that are concerned with information being stored in a particular what they call jurisdiction or an area, and that at least they are that our standard is at the same level of those. Mhm. And then lastly, when comparing to other laws, I say generally it does give a comprehensive list of set of regulations and protections that at least try to strike a good balance between promoting freedom of expression, especially in the journalistic sense. That's like I said, like we're doing right now, and safeguarding the individual rights, privacy rights of a person. So you could say it's a quite a good model of legislation in Africa that, of course, will only be as effective as how it is regulated and enforced. Thank you.
Mm, mm. Beautiful, quite a comprehensive explanation. So, did you sit and study these things? You seem to be just copying and
Ah, you know, when you're discussing things like this, you really have to know what the facts are. So I really had it's something that has been on my mind for a while, but I was
yes,
just observing the market and seeing what steps the country is making towards bringing it out. And I think it's also a matter of time. I think this is now the right time to share these things. So for me as an audit, I have to know this stuff.
yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So, do you
Mhm.
think then that every ordinary Zambian need to invest their time into understanding what this act entails? What would be your advice?
So for my advice, the we need to understand a general Zambia. You need to understand which provisions apply to you. It's just like with any other law. We
Mm,
know, for example, criminal laws. You know what kind of crimes will attract a certain fine. Especially, I think
mm,
one which is pretty neither here or there is, for example, the road traffic offenses.
mm,
We know what activities can attract an offense, so we
mm.
should know what we can do to avoid incurring those offenses, and also the same with us. We need to know what our rights are. If we are violated, what channels do we have to address those violations? And in the at this other at the other time on the other side, how are we protected from others misusing our information that we share willingly with others?
Beautiful, beautiful, and very important. Very, very important. Personally, I think it should be a responsibility of everybody. To understand this act, because this is a new way of life. Our lives now
Mhm,
are so data driven.
mhm.
And going forward,
Very good.
it's going to be more and more of that. So I think
Mhm,
people just need to engage with the document and have
mhm,
a clear understanding. So then let's
mhm,
look at the strengths and the weaknesses of this act. In your opinion, and you did give some analysis on LinkedIn. Um,
mhm.
what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the Zambia Data Protection Act are in terms of protecting individual privacy and personal data?
Oof, okay. Time for the word salad. So, hmm. First things first. Like I
Yes.
mentioned before, the act being there does demonstrate that Zambia is taking active steps to ensure a right of privacy, which is upholding Article 17 of the Zambian Constitution. So it's placing Zambia, just like other growing African nations, that are taking proactive steps to ensure individual data privacy. And like I mentioned earlier, the scope is quite comprehensive. So it applies to whether information is being processed within or outbound. As well, also, another thing to note is not just electronic data, even non-electronic data, which would be stuff that you write
Mm,
on your notepads and stuff. That's still information, by the way, which is covered by the act. So one strength that I do like about it is that, and especially coming from my background, or should I say, in the context that I work in with World Vision, which is a non-governmental organization, which does have, which one of the key things that we work on is safeguarding children and vulnerable people. So Section 17, for example, prohibits people from processing data for children and other vulnerable people without giving consent by other, if it's a vulnerable child, without consent from a parent or a guardian. So it mandates anyone who's collecting that information to make as much possible effort to ensure that they get consent by whatever means, whether it's a written statement or a verbal confirmation to verify that. Though for me personally, I don't like, especially in the audit space, I don't like verbal confirmations, because the only way you can have evidence of that is if you have a recording. But then again, recording someone without their consent is also an issue. So yeah, so there's that. Then moving on, when checking on sections 58 to 69, they generally out give a really exhaustive list of the rights that you have, or the data, what the law defines as data subject. So this is someone who the law is being applied to, or where the information is being collected from. So that's looking at the right of what they have access to, notifying someone that you're going to collect the information or delete it, or that is going to be used for all sorts of things. I assure you that especially you who lives on the internet, sometimes when you go to different sites for the first time, you get that disclaimer that comes up. Do you consent to us receiving this information? Will not use it for so. Because of data protection laws like that, that is mandated, that any one of these companies that are running sites in those jurisdictions need the person visiting to consent to that information being collected. So that's one thing that is pretty progressive. And hopefully, when we're looking at enforcement, I would visualize a situation where Zambian sites also start doing that. I know some of them, maybe they are not aware of it, but like I said, we're here to discuss awareness. So maybe the one takeaway from this would be them to look at, say, okay, how can we implement this so that we're at least in line with what the expectations are. Now,
Mm.
apart from these strengths, now we'll look at shortcomings, I feel. Number one, the act does have a few weaknesses that potentially undermine its overall effectiveness. Number one being how it defines what personal use of data is. In legal terms, when you're defining things, if you leave it a bit ambiguous, it creates loopholes that could be exploited for misuse. And also other terms like national security. So, for example, if your data is required to be collected for what they call a national security or security related purpose, we it does not explicitly define what that security purpose should be. So there's a potential for government overreach in how they get information from us, because we won't there's no limit into what can be taken and what can't be. And then also, it as the law does provide information on what rights people have, it's it needs to somehow be more calibrated to align with the Zambia's technological readiness, because there are some clauses that require a need for local infrastructure and the like. But then you may look at some companies and say, hey, especially multinational ones which have got data centers outside or within here that we take advantage of, would they have to bring their own infrastructure here, and at whose cost? And usually with these multinational companies that are dealing with so much information, it's a huge cost to come and invest in infrastructure here. And then what's the benefit? Just are they going to do it just for compliance? Does it help their business operations? So sometimes they would get the authority could get pushback in line with that. I think that's a general. I could go deeper. That's why the report is that long. But for just a general key highlights, I think those are important to note. Thank you.
Yes, so you bring quite an important aspect, which I think from the business point of view, because obviously, I'm in business and that's of
Mm.
interest. So when you talk about data centers, being localized, do you just
Mhm.
want to dig a little bit more into that and what the implications are as it relates to the act?
Okay, so in terms of that, it's you could say the act isn't considering cost implications. So there's a need, and this goes to how it talks about how data is transferred between borders. So just to paraphrase, the act
Mm.
states that data has to be processed and stored on servers or data centers within the republic, but it doesn't specify what exceptions that could be. So it's essentially what we're saying is that all the information in Zambia has to be stored in Zambia. But how practical is it?
That was
Mm,
going to be my next question because people
mm,
are storing these things, elsewhere in
mm,
their cloud centers
mm,
elsewhere as
mm.
well. So how practical is that?
Yeah, exactly. And there's also another clause which says that the consent has to be given in order for information to be stored outside the public. So are we going to all now have to go and seek consent from the Data Protection Commission in terms of oh, I want to store this information outside? And especially I know you how you know you I don't know if you're familiar with government operations, but I am. You do tend to have a lot of bureaucracy. So you can imagine the process that it would take to request and get that approval in a speedy time, and then at the same time your business needs to run.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
so it does leave a lot to be desired there on how practical it is. And also when, like you said, people are storing things in the cloud, I'm sure you have a Gmail account, right? Gmail or Outlook. That information is hosted by Google, and the location of those servers is not anywhere within, may not even be on the continent.
yeah.
So would you have to now go to Google themselves and tell them, hey, give us all this information, you want to store it here locally, and the people can only access it locally. But yet, if, like, for me who travels in different countries, does that mean I have to go back to my home country to access that? I can't access things on the fly. So it becomes very restricted if we are going to follow things to the T as it's specified in there. So maybe, like I said in the suggestion, the wedding they need to look at how practical it is and maybe realign those clauses with us actually happening on the ground. Because sometimes also with long legislation like this, you put a lot
Mm,
of clauses, huh? And it looks nice on the outside. Oh, I've covered this, I've
mm,
covered this, I've covered this. But now when it comes to enforcement, how do you do it? So, like you talked
mm,
earlier about training different key members of the enforcement community, whether it's the police or otherwise, how would they if there's a violation, how do they follow up on that if someone is outside? What's the guidance? Things like that. So it's a Pandora's box that we have to open at some point or another and see what's inside. But we can adjust. I feel there's possibility to adjust accordingly, seeing that at least the Ministry of Science and Technology is taking an active approach to get submissions in terms from different institutions in terms of what they feel are issues with the act and how how it can be amended accordingly. I know I should have mentioned this later on, but I'm just bringing it to the forefront just so that you're aware of what's happening within that space in regards to things like this.
no, but that's very important, and I'm glad you've brought that up because that was actually going to be my next question. That are there channels in which people can actually give feedback? Once they've looked at the act, to give feedback on what can be tweaked, what can be changed. So I'm
Mhm.
glad that you're saying, there's still openness for people to give input to the act. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yes, through
So,
the
what would be
Ministry of
the
Science
right
and
channel?
Technology.
What would the business do if they want to give input? Do you know what channels they would have to
Mm.
follow?
So for me, because I'm in different IT professional organizations. So for me, I'm fortunate enough. I can give my channels through people that are linked with the authorities. But I know the ultimate authority would be is not would be is the Ministry of Science and Technology. Of course, I still need to confirm, but there should be at least some channel within the that ministry, because that's the one that is covered through that is responsible for ensuring that all of this comes to life,
Mm,
especially where the
mm.
act is concerned.
Okay, very, very interesting. Uh, because we're still talking about, data storage, when it comes to whether to store, within the local space or internationally, let's look at the fact that the Act includes provisions regarding cross-border data transfers. Could you
Mhm.
discuss the implication of these provisions for businesses operating in Zambia and their international partners?
Okay, yeah. So, like I'd mentioned earlier about jurisdictions. So, while overall these provisions do provide some safeguards for data protection, there is a concern that state agencies could potentially access data without people's individual consent. Also, this situation does undermine the privacy rights of an individual and expose people to unauthorized surveillance. And also for businesses, it means that they have to be very cautious and ensure compliance with the requirements. Should and like I mentioned about obtaining previously about obtaining consent and approval from the Data Protection Commission, in order to minimize the risk of data losses. So for international partners, they need to be aware of what these provisions are and try work collaboratively to ensure compliance, as it's crucial to establish secure mechanisms and prioritize the privacy rights of individuals that are involved in this cross-border transfer.
Mm, mm,
So
mm.
ultimately, just
So do you believe
overall, mm, yeah, no,
yeah.
go
No,
ahead.
carry on. Sorry for
Yeah, so what I wanted to say just overall is that while the provisions in the, of the cross-border provisions in the Act are looking to provide data protection, it's also essential for different businesses and their partners to adequately navigate these provisions very carefully so that they can safeguard people's privacy rights and also maintain compliance at the same time.
beautiful, beautiful. So do you think this act is innovative and forward thinking in the context of data protection? What's your view on that?
Mm, okay, so in terms of innovation and forward thinking, I would say uh, generally it's as it's like I mentioned earlier, where I was talking about provisions that cover protection of information of vulnerable people. Um, I think it does do quite a lot in equipping organization with tools that can allow them to fortify their defenses, but at the same time also allow enough innovation to occur so that because data protection and innovation go hand in hand. When you're building
Mm,
for example, I can give an example of building systems. When you're building a new system, at least your privacy concerns can be embedded before something even goes live. So at least people are on the ball in terms of making sure that we're making things that are secure and allow people to be comfortable that their data privacy rights are being respected.
beautiful, 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 beautiful. So then, data breaches have become a significant concern globally. How well do you think Zambia Data Protection Act addresses the issue of data breaches, and what steps should organization take to comply with the act in this regard?
Hmm. Okay, for this one, I'm going to use a metaphor to explain. Huh? So, a data breach, for those listeners who don't know what it is you can relate it to an unwelcome thief sneaking into your yard, trying to get things there. Except that in this case, they're not trying to steal. steal your household goods, but they try to steal your information. So yes, like you mentioned, they have become a rising concern, and you could say the act does come across as a good shield that is ready to tackle this. So what the act does, it does equip organizations with tools to improve their defenses as well as prevent those breaches. So it's almost like your security as layers, huh? Different layers, and the act is coming in as a layer to help fortify or reinforce that fortress. Or in short, if you didn't, speaking to people in the Zambian context, we're putting up a wall fence now, where they were before the land was open. So with organizations coming in to follow that act and its guidance, it helps them enforce their controls in that like. And also, in the fortunate event that a breach does happen, the act also helps to be like a swift alarm, ensuring that organizations can respond quickly because there are provisions in the act that allow for, in the case of a breach, there are channels to be followed in terms of alerting and taking steps and actions in order to address that breach. Because the act requires that if the breach occurs, the organization needs to notify the affected individuals as well as the Data Protection Commission. So I can give an example for this big company, Sony, when they had a data breach, they literally had to send an email to all their customers worldwide saying, "Hey, there's this breach that has happened. It has affected you, and in order to combat this, we need you to take these steps. So in case it may be, oh, you need to update your account security. Now I know there's this new technology that has come on, which they call multi-factor authentication, which requires you to have different means of proving that you are who you say you are when you're trying to access a system. And yeah, also informing of the potential damage and what measures are being taken by that company that has had that incident to manage it. So ensuring that compliance, like I said, the company is raising its defense higher and higher and higher in such a way that they can build strategies now to quickly identify and contain issues, assess impact, like I said, inform people, and also just keep their defenses up to date. So they're always vigilant because it's like the same way you have a security guard. Huh? The security guard is not there only to respond to an incident, but just to show that okay, in case of something, there's someone here
Mm.
in place to protect the property and people that are behind it. So essentially, that's what the act is doing for us.
Beautiful, beautiful. In your view, do you see any potential conflicts or gaps between the Zambia Data Protection Act and other existing laws or regulations, such as those related to national security or law enforcement?
Hmm, that's a very insightful question, huh? Especially when you have a legislation that can slip over into other people's jurisdiction, as they
Mm.
say. So when we are looking at the landscape of laws as a whole, I do know notice some paths that intertwine. So dealing with laws, dealing with national security and law enforcement. So as well on this journey, they always need to tread carefully because one conflict can arise is law enforcement needs, like I mentioned earlier about security incidents. Huh? So they say there's an incident and it's a security one, but information needs to be extracted from a place in order to analyze, okay, what happened, who are the culprits involved. But now the act may restrict how much information you can require from someone legally, but yet that information will also be needed in order to investigate the case. And like with police, they all rely on information. So now, how does the act needs to balance being able to give information that is enough to help this wing and that wing, but also to avoid any overuse or misuse or overreach. Because if you give an enforcement agency unlimited access, all it just takes is one bad actor, and maybe he starts collecting people's bank account information, you know, their NRCs, their locations. You start spying on people, things like that. We can't assume that information will always be received and collected with good intent, because all it takes is one bad egg to mess up the whole thing.
mm,
So
mm,
it's important that there's harmony between the contradictions of laws and those that are affecting it, so that at least national security or whichever wings can work together, like the gears on a well-oiled machine, for lack of a better word.
mm, mm, mm. So one of the things that data protection laws often does is that it impacts on technological innovation and research. How do you
Mhm.
think the Zambia Data Protection Act strikes a balance between protecting individuals' privacy while fostering innovation in the digital economy?
Mm. Yeah, so one good thing about the act is that it does, how can I put it? As part of establishing a robust data protection framework, it does give us an opportunity to have a holistic approach in terms of providing security. And like I mentioned earlier, where security is a backbone of most systems that are being in place, it also gives a platform to allow for innovative means of security. As opposed to the traditional things like your passwords and whatnot. It does help give some ways that we can be innovative, what in complying, but at the same time also um, addressing that innovation. And also, while the restrictions are there for privacy, there are some exceptions in the act that are there for research purposes, which should allow in the long run people to help to people that are deep in the research field to consider innovations or help foster those innovations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, my next question is the question around data protection and individual consent. I know we've sort of touched on it here and there as we were conversing,
Mhm.
but I know that one of the key aspects of data protection is individuals' consent. How
Mhm.
does the Act address the issue of consent? And what challenges might individuals face in exercising their rights under this act?
Yeah. Oof, this one, consent is always a key issue.
Mm,
Key issue. And lack of consent always brings problems, not just with data protection, but other things as well.
yeah.
Um, while the Act does emphasize informed consent, which is crucial, the big challenge for individuals tends to lie in the very, very complex language of consent forms. So sometimes the consent form will have all these long causes. Oh, I give you the right to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's like when people are getting loans. How many people read through the paperwork? Very few. You only get to see the impact when you're looking at the interest payments. But what is this? But then when you look, no, you signed to this. You agreed to this, and that condition. Same with work contracts or any other binding legal document. There's a need for that language to be broken down in a way that's easy for people to understand. So to address this, we guess there's two ways. You can have more efforts like this that we're having in order to educate the public of their rights. But at the same time, those that are seeking consent need to break down exactly why they need consent, what is the information being used for, where is it being stored, who is going to utilize this,
Mm,
who are we giving this information to,
mm,
that kind of, yeah.
mm, mm, mm. Beautifully explained. So, as we wrap up this conversation, just looking ahead, what are your recommendations, given all this analysis that you have given? In your view, what would be your recommendations for further enhancing the Zambia Data Protection Act or addressing any potential shortcomings that you have identified in your analysis?
Whew, there are many recommendations, like you saw, and those who have had the time to to have a look at this analysis. And I hope you put a plug for it in case people want to make reference to it on LinkedIn. I guess so. I'll just give maybe overall recommendations. I think one is for the act to be looked at and give precise definitions to terms which are ambiguous. Also, maybe the act, there need to be amendments to the act in terms of scope. And when I say scope, I'm talking about like territories where you're saying store information in Zambia. You need to reassess what can actually be stored in Zambia and how practical it is to do so. And if not, there needs to be maybe a supporting process in which the there can be a means for us to allow where possible, if controls, or say for example, if it's being stored, for example, in the US, we need to have some assurance that even if our information is being stored elsewhere, we are comfortable with it being there, because it's the security and the controls around that will ensure that a breach, it would limit the impact of a breach. And also in terms of enforcement, because that's the big one. We can have all these acts and laws, but if the authority to enforce them isn't equipped with the tools and the mandate and the willpower, or should you say political willpower, to carry that out, it may be a bit of a challenge for it to come to life. And then, this act is so long. Maybe we could have more thorough assessments of the cost implications of compliance in certain terms, just to have a balance between what the act requires and how cost effective it is. And then lastly, I guess looking at investing in developing people's local capacity to understand this act and implement that, and also be able to educate the public, as well as have that engaged and continuous discussion, so that nobody is left off the table. It's not a closed discussion, but overall, that we have that holistic approach that combines the legislative reform that will need to be involved if you're making changes to the act, and then collaboration with stakeholders, whether it's public consultation or the like, and also educational initiatives. And when I say education, we shouldn't limit it to just adults, even children as well.
Mm,
If it
mm.
means going into schools and letting them know, okay, your information is very valuable, you need to protect it, or it needs to be protected, that kind of discussion. I know as a teacher, you'd love to go and teach these things.
No, definitely, definitely. So, these discussions actually start challenging the current curriculums that exist
Hmm.
globally, that have been around for centuries, because people
Hmm.
now are starting to say, let's revamp and,
Hmm.
include conversations like this, in the curriculum. So learners or even children know from when they're young, what their rights are, and what information they can give out, what information they can't give out, and so on. So then it wouldn't be a conversation without us relating this to social media, because social media
Hmm.
affects everyone.
Yeah. Mhm.
How does this play in in the social media space when it comes to data protection and privacy rights? I know that in certain countries, you
Mhm.
can't post an image with somebody in your back without their consent,
Mhm.
so you see people actually
Mhm.
highlight people's faces, just to protect
Mhm.
that. And I know that, the school that my kids go to, this is a conversation that they've had, and the school
Mhm.
does teach them, about social media etiquette.
Mhm.
Yeah, so can you just talk to us about how this would relate to the way people, also behave in terms of, posting people in their photos, and
Mhm.
privacy rights.
Yeah, it's very overarching, and I know if I'm looking at the Zambian context, there's so many violations I see every day. The common one being where people post somewhere a conversation you had with someone. You take a screenshot and then you post it either in your status or chat. Maybe it may be funny to you, but the person on the receiving end technically has the right to to take some legal action against you. You know, things like I said. So, like I said, things like conversations, also forwarding information which may not be true. I know you. I'm sure you're in many WhatsApp groups, and I'm not singling out people, but from my experience, they tend to be groups where you have people that just forward information anyhow. No
Mm.
research done, they don't
No
verify,
reason even. Forget
no
research.
reason
They haven't
even.
even read. They just
Just
forward.
post, just forward. So, and sometimes it may be information that's damaging to someone, you know.
Mm. Mm.
So, as the person who originated that forward, you can be liable to that. Also, like you said, images where there's taking photos. In some countries, you can't even take a photo of a car's number plate. If a
Mm.
number plate is visible, you're
Yeah.
liable. Or even products. Say, for
Mm.
example, you're wearing branded clothing. Like
Mm.
now, I'm wearing branded clothing, but I have to cover it because in
Mm.
some jurisdictions you won't be allowed to stream this video because hey, there's what do they call this, intellectual property on display.
Mm.
Things like that. You're displaying intellectual property without permission, things like
Mm.
that. Also, maybe for the person that's watching, intellectual property basically means that um, likeliness or images that belong to a certain company. So, for example, if it's Adidas or these sports brands, me wearing something with Nike or what, some instances I can't do that unless I've gotten permission from them. Because say if anything negative is associated with me, it could be associated with the brand, or the brand supports. Say, for example, if I was a terrorist, then it'd be we've got terrorists that support Nike and are wearing these brands. I think one impact of such things was it the last World Cup? Was it before the last World Cup? Cristiano Ronaldo. While he was having press conferences, there were Coke bottles that were put on his table, and he says, I don't drink that stuff. I only like water. Just that very statement with a frenzy. And it went so bad to the point where they had even lost share value in the stock market just because of a statement like that. Because it's like, oh, this guy doesn't associate with this product, and as such, others also won't. People who follow him religiously. So there's so many different avenues, and especially, and for me, who works in an area where child protection is key, is also photos of underage minors. You may see people doing something and take a snapshot or a video, but especially with kids, if you don't get their consent, hey, that's a big issue. Very, very big issue. Because you never know. This guy maybe he grows up to be someone big. And especially if in the political field, is a recording that was taken 10, 15 years ago can magically resurface. you know, Things like that. So privacy is very, very, it's something that we really, really need to look at. But I think more of what would help is just that general one-to-one user awareness.
Mm.
I think some people maybe just do these things out of ignorance.
Yeah.
It's not that they're trying to be notorious; they just don't know any better. Mhm. So you would want to avoid a situation where you've got so much legal action, but because people just don't understand how the law
Mm.
works. Mhm.
Mm.
And how they can best avoid having issues with that particular law. But then at the same time, you also don't want the law to be so restrictive that our freedoms are curtailed. Because if
Yeah.
you say don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, as human beings, we have a tendency to rebel when there are too many rules.
True.
Yeah, yeah.
True. No, Sampa, thank you so much. You have brought so much value, and you've actually tried to break down things that seem quite complex. I think this is quite complex for a lot of
Mhm,
people, but thank you so much just for your heart to break down this information and bring so much value to people. I hope a lot of people, especially within the Zambian context, they will
mhm,
take time to just read about the new act so that
mhm,
people are equipped and
mhm,
well informed.
mhm,
So yes, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from you,
mhm,
and yeah, just a very sound perspective you bring, and quite practical as well. So thank you,
mhm.
much appreciated.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for the opportunity. And I'll just put a plug there. I'm on LinkedIn, Sampa Sampa. You can find me there. I also do other I also write on other areas in the tech space. So I'm always looking to learn and see what's trending and try to inform the people of how that affects them in their day to day.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm certainly following you. Once I saw you put that, the information on what we're discussing, and hence I reached out to you. I was like, yeah, this is a guy I can learn from. So yeah, well done. Always great to have people that are sharing valuable information online.
Hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day. For now, it's
You
ciao,
too.
ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.
Bye.